Chapter 12. Well, her conclusion, based on evidence and research, was that she was drunk. She had to be. Drunk on what, or rather, who? Well, that was a different question. She woke up warm and beyond comfortable. At the same time, her back was a bit stiff, but she had no desire to move, especially when she realized she had Link's arm draped across her waist and his face directly in front of hers. Holding her breath didn't help slow her racing heart. Goddess, he looked so peaceful. It was so unlike the Link she was used to, always alert, always anxious, always ready. She wanted so badly to lean forward a bit and to press her lips to his, to see him wake contented with her beside him, longing for her as much as she found herself longing for him. His eyes fluttered open, locked on hers, and a lazy smile spread across his mouth. He hummed tiredly, ignoring the sun that was still overhead, and found his eyes closing again. Zelda took advantage, scooting closer to him, but lower, so she was pressed directly against him, and waited for his arm to push her away. Instead, he slid it underneath her head so she could rest in the crook of his elbow, and his head lolled back down. Goddess, the freedom had to be what was making her drunk. The constant vigilance of the castle had her always on edge, and there was something about Link's dropped guard that set her entirely at ease. She closed her eyes, listening to his steady heart under her ear, drifting off like it were a white noise that she needed to sleep. She woke up again when it was dusk, evening light starting to set in. Link jerked awake, as if startled by a dream and suddenly alert, and it had Zelda following suit. From the clenched fist on the back of her shirt, she figured it was one that he hadn't quite awoken from yet. He blinked several times before looking Zelda over, inspecting her for injuries, but she just watched him patiently. And then he looked down, and his entire face burned red. They were covered by a blanket. Zelda chuckled.
Your mother?
I hope so. Otherwise we'll have to explain a few things.
Zelda made a rueful noise and pushed herself up, rubbing at her eyes.
Did we spend all day here?
Link joined her, nodding.
Looks it.
I'm sorry.
Zelda turned to Link. His eyes were lit by the remnant light of the setting sun.
You lost a whole day home because of me.
Bringing himself to his feet, he balled the blanket up in front of him and pulled Zelda up beside him.
I didn't. Do you know how long it's been since I could relax like this?
A while, I imagine.
Yes.
He led Zelda back up the hill to his house and tentatively pushed the door open, checking to see if anyone was home. Blessedly, the room was empty. For a few seconds, anyway. Raina came around the corner to check on the door, and she smiled at them knowingly before looking away. Yep, she'd been the one who found them. Link gnawed his bottom lip as he folded the blanket and handed it to his mother with a mumbling thanks before sitting down. His mom took it without comment, draping it over her arm. Zelda awkwardly took the free space beside him, though she left as large of a gap as she could, her eyes glued to the floor as if it held the secrets of the world. The silence between the three stretched on for what felt like hours, but Raina finally leaned back against the counter and turned to them.
You two missed lunch. Are either of you hungry?
Zelda quickly shook her head, while Link muttered a simple no. Zelda watched Link help his mother with dinner anyway. Elwyn came home and threw himself beside Zelda, out of breath and exhausted from working, and Errol returned almost perfectly timed with when dinner was served. Life in Hateno, Zelda realized, was quieter than she imagined. She had a vision of neighbors rushing over to Link, greeting him after his time away, but the more she thought about it, the more she wondered if he had any friends in Hateno at all. It had been so long, but still, she knew she'd made the right call with this surprise visit home. The smile that was plastered across his face every time he so much as glanced at a family member spoke volumes in lieu of words. That night, she tried so hard to give him his bed, but he fought her again. Only this time, Zelda had an ace up her sleeve, a compromise of sorts.
We just slept together by the pond.
Link's eyebrows shot up, and he made a face.
We did?
Yeah. Oh, shut up! You're such a child sometimes.
Grinning, he shrugged and watched her examine the wood carvings once again, dressed comfortably in the same borrowed clothes from last night. He knew that move. Whenever she wanted to hide her red face from him, she'd distract herself with some random object in the other direction. But he knew she wasn't upset or embarrassed when she spun on her heels and marched straight towards him. Her hand went flat on his chest, and she pushed him towards the bed, so much so that he had to grab her arm for balance. He was unprepared, and his eyes were wide with shock. She kept pushing him until he was pinned between her and the bed, his mind suddenly going hazy from how close she was in a non-training sort of way. All he could feel was the heat of her hand through his shirt.
Get in the bed.
The command was riddled with royal authority, so much so that Link found himself sitting almost immediately. It earned a triumphant smile from her and a smug expression of success.
You're sleeping in this bed. With me. While we sleep, I mean.
Yes, Princess.
Good. Then get in. I'm tired.
He slid under the blanket, his eyes trapped on her as she waited. And when her body heat joined his under the covers, he sucked in a breath and held it for goddess knows how long. The bed was small. Link choked the breath right back out.
Sorry.
She apologized, but she had little choice but to press herself up against him to keep from falling out. Link quickly rolled onto his back, feeling flushed.
Friends do this, right?
Her voice had grown groggy, her mind clearly reeling with some unheard thoughts.
I think so.
He said this, though in truth, he had no friends to reference, and this in particular, especially with his increasing attraction towards her, did not feel like something that mere friends did. The bed jostled as Zelda settled herself, and yelped. Link spun, his arm instinctively reaching out to grab her by the shirt. Goddess, she was on the edge of the bed. Goddess, goddess, goddess.
Princess, was this the best plan?
He asked this both reluctantly and eagerly, sliding his arm over her, pulling her closer to him so she had more room on that side. There was absolutely no way she wouldn't be able to tell that he was more on edge than she was right now.
Do you want out? I know I ordered it, but I really don't want you to be uncomfortable.
No.
She peeked over her shoulder, revealing just how red her face was. If there was any consolation, it was that he wasn't suffering alone. Her lip tipped up in a small, reassuring smile.
Okay.
For some time, they laid there in a stretch of silence, both acutely aware of the other. Hyper-aware, in fact.
Goddess Princess, you'll never fall asleep if your heart is racing that fast.
Zelda scoffed and rolled her hips back. His thoughts scrambled, and completely tense, he damn near whimpered.
What did you say, Link? I couldn't hear you.
Nothing.
Nervously, he tried to get distance while craving more of her. But her body sagged after a while, no other words spoken, and Link sat up to look at her, brushing some of her hair from her face, burning his fingers at the touch of her skin, letting his stomach roil with fluttery sensations, and he laid back down. No, he didn't think mere friends thought of each other this way. So he closed his eyes and dreamed that they weren't just friends. He was still on vacation, after all. During Link's last day in Hateno, Zelda stayed out of his way as much as she could. She did join him for a morning run, but once they'd returned, she kept to herself to allow Link all the time in the world with his family. She enjoyed the fresh air, watched the clouds, enjoyed the waterfall, and wistfully looked over the village, wishing she could have explored. But despite her attempts at distance for his sake, Link's family kept bringing her in, as if she were their own. She aided Reyna in the field after her run that morning. Elwyn asked for help fixing a few things, which she happily provided. Errol told embarrassing stories about Link, which she gladly listened to. But still it felt like she was overstaying her welcome, despite their kindness and insistence that she was fine. She felt she'd taken Link from his parents, even when he shot her a look that told her otherwise. Perhaps that was simply what it meant to be so used to being the nuisance, the one in the way that people have to provide for. The useless one. And perhaps this was what it felt like to be useful. She was finally understanding more and more that with a sword, with opportunity, and with people, she didn't have to be useless as her father had commanded. She wasn't porcelain, and this was finally her way of proving it. There was something so otherworldly about Hateno that made her want to stay. It was warm and welcoming. It was far from the rest of the world where the calamity wasn't a thought in her mind. But several guards arrived to escort her and Link back to the castle, causing a commotion of clamoring villagers trying to catch a glimpse of why the palace soldiers were in their remote little village. Unfortunately, the instant the glass shattered and the facade fell, Link and Zelda felt themselves slip immediately back into their roles. Link was stiff-backed as he said goodbye to his family. Zelda wore her nicest clothes as she greeted as many villagers as she could. When they stood at the gate, Link having said goodbye to his family and was preparing with the others, his family pushed through the crowd that had gathered for a final farewell. The way Reyna's arms wrapped tightly around her and squeezed reminded her of the hugs she used to get from Urbosa when she'd visit, though it had been some time. Errol's was friendly and warm. There was an unfamiliar comfort to them that Zelda couldn't place. From his years of being a knight, Elwyn didn't have that sense of informality. He bowed low, apologizing that he couldn't get to his knees, and though she tried to stop him, he insisted. She left Link to have time alone with his family for their goodbyes, and went to wait with the rest of her guards.
How is it out there?
She had asked the nearest guard, a man she knew from several of her excursions, Char.
Nothing has changed in this short time, Princess.
She grinned, affectionately petting his horse as she passed.
One can always hope you'd have brought news that the Yiga's hideout had burned down or something.
Char chuckled.
I'd have ridden here straight away to give you good news like that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Did you enjoy your stay here?
I did, rather. Thank you for asking. It was a nice change of pace. I needed that.
With a small smile and a bow, Char returned his attention to their surroundings, especially when Link came down the hill. She could see his chainmail hanging under his shirt and a stiff, knightly expression. Perhaps one day, she'd ride around with mail on. Saddled, packed, and with goodbyes behind them, the group headed away from Hateno. The ride would be long, and Zelda stayed beside Link's horse all the way down the road and into the valley as she was instructed. He was silent, diligent, alert. She watched him. She always watched him, probably as closely as he watched her. It's how she noticed him tense up right away, spine stiff, eyes wide. When he didn't immediately say anything, she prodded him.
What?
He glanced at her and shook his head.
Nothing, Princess. I just thought I heard a...
He trailed off, his brow furrowing.
Wait. Stop.
Zelda pulled her reins, staring at Link, as was the rest of the company. He was still, his eyes darting around.
You don't hear that?
No.
How many people knew we were leaving Hateno today?
Many. Why?
Dismounting, Link took a few steps away from Zelda, his eyes closed as he strained to hear whatever it was.
Link, you've been relaxing for days. You're probably just on edge.
Leave him be.
Her tone was far too hostile, but she didn't care. Her heart rate was spiking the longer Link looked around. Then, his eyes widened, and he ran back, pulling Zelda from her horse with a force that physically hurt and would bruise in the morning. Just as an arrow flew above her saddle, right where she'd been sitting. Her eyes were large as shock and fear pervaded her face while she clutched Link, trying to breathe and find her footing. That was the closest call she'd ever had. The bridge that had prompted this all was nothing compared to seeing an arrow miss her face by just a second. Link had his sword in one hand and Zelda's arm in the other, keeping her angled behind him. Without prompting, the knights formed ranks around Zelda, keeping her in the center of a large circle they'd created. Everyone was on alert now, but there was no sign of a shooter. No sign of anything. Zelda crept closer to Link, the hairs on her neck standing straight up. She'd gone bone cold as a feeling of dread washed over her, and she wrapped her arm around Link's. He gave her a look that politely said to let go so he could fight if needed, but when he caught sight of her haunted eyes, he couldn't bring himself to say anything.
Link? Link?
Yes?
Link?
He fully turned to her, his attention off his surroundings at her broken tone.
What is it?
She licked her lips and closed her eyes, her stomach churning, her head spinning. She was freezing. The hairs, the fear, her grip on him.
Something's behind me.
Link's mouth dropped to say something, but closed just as fast, acting on her word without a second thought. He spun Zelda around to his other side just in time to see a Yiga appear in a plume of smoke, bringing down a vicious sickle with all their force. It struck deep into the ground, pulling up clumps of dirt and grass. And then, several more appeared. Most of the guards were able to follow Link's lead and Zelda's warning. They turned in time to deflect or dodge their own attacks, but two were hit, falling to their knees before crashing into the ground with a pool of blood around them. Zelda took a step back, tripping over a small rock as her attention divvied out to the scene before her. Goddess, there were so many Yiga. She watched her guards take on the Yiga in a flurry of action that she couldn't keep complete track of. Blades and steel clashed. Movements in carefully practiced stances flowed together. Char was fighting a large man with a larger sword. It was strength on strength, both hammering away at each other, deflecting and parrying and moving every second. And Link had been right. The Yiga forewent armor for the sake of movement, because despite this Yiga's build, he was nimble and fast, light on his feet, quick to dodge everything Char threw at him. A cry from her own guard as blood trickled down his sleeve had Zelda struggling to swallow her spit. Link was fighting two Yiga who were both trying to get past him to Zelda. And that was another thing Link had been right about. He was holding back on her in training. Though it wasn't quite to her surprise, he was everything he claimed to be. Every snarky comment, every joke or jab, or the preening about his skills hadn't been a lie. His eyes were everywhere. His feet were never still, but somehow they were still planted firmly, and his attention was solid. His strikes varied from defense when the Yiga came too close to getting past him, to offense when he threw them off even a little bit, wasting no time trying to kill them with blinding speed. And he was fast. Zelda couldn't keep track of his movements. If she wanted to learn, she couldn't. Everything came to him like a reflex, a skill so carefully honed that he didn't even need to put conscious effort into it. She'd once mocked her father's claim that the best fighter in the kingdom was her own age, but any lingering doubt was gone in an instant. There were several guards she could see struggling, though. In a contest of strength, blades crossed. She watched hers go down with a sickening noise that made her want to throw up as it burned into her mind. Another guard was felled for not having the speed needed to keep up with the Yiga. Blood coated the front of his armor before he collapsed out of sight. A new Yiga headed for her, and Link was fighting 3. She stepped backwards, tripping in her fine dress, helpless without a weapon, scared from the overwhelming numbers. Her breath was gone as she stared at her greatest fear stalking towards her. Link's arm was suddenly around her, throwing her to the ground with a hard force. Again, it hurt, but the Yiga Link had been fighting through a demon carver, and with Zelda out of the way, it lodged straight into the chest of the approaching foe. Link swiped at a Yiga's leg, bringing that one down with a final thrust before backing up to stab another. With one moment to breathe, his eyes swept over Zelda. She was figuring he was checking to see if she was injured, but he looked worse, splattered in blood, hair a wild mess, chest heaving. He pulled her to her feet and shoved her out of the bulk of the battle.
Run, princess!
Not a second later, more Yiga were on him, trying to get past to Zelda. Her eyes were trapped on the carnage. Char looked to be losing his fight as well. A massive Yiga took several steps towards her, and she cowed back, but Char tugged the man backwards by the neck, and they both lost their weapons. To her horror, though, Char's effort to save her left him a bleeding heap, curled lifelessly in the grass. The Yiga closed the gap, but Link was there again. He did something. Goddess, the world blurred when he moved with that innate fury. And when he turned to her, his lips were moving, but no sound seemed to come out, despite his animated features. It's how she realized her very brain was humming, tuning out the noises and sounds of the battle. To hear him, she'd have to hear everything, and she wasn't sure she was ready. It was metal and screams. It was the sound of boots scraping against dirt and fabric shifting, grunts and groans, and Link yelling a single word at her, not for the first time.
Run!
She had 3 living guards left, and there were still 5 Yiga. Link picked up a fallen Yiga's weapon and hucked it with all his might into one of the remaining Yiga, lodging the blade through skin. It distracted him enough to get off of one of the guards, but the Yiga survived the hit.
Damn it, Zelda! Run!
She turned to the sound of her name and watched Link parry a fatal blow, though it still ripped across his chest, leaving him crying out in pain before momentum and adrenaline had him straightening back up. Link ran towards her, getting in front just in time for another blow to glance off his sword and against his face this time, cutting a long gash along his cheek. He shoved Zelda away from the blades as hard as he could, and she stumbled, losing her footing. Her hand cut against a rock, a sharp sting that had her snapping back to reality from the haze she'd been fumbling around in. She looked up. Link, very injured and heavily bleeding, tossed something into his mouth. She watched a small vial shatter as he tossed it to the ground. One more of her guards down. 3 Yiga. And one more Yiga was aiming another arrow at her face. She knew Link's rules. She knew them. Number 1 was to run. These were trained assassins. And 2 was to call out for help, because Link was only one man and couldn't have eyes everywhere, though he sure seemed to have a third eye constantly trained on her. But when it came time to act or die, neither of those options happened. She dove forward and covered her face, feeling the arrows wind over her head, and she started to crawl to the corpse of a Yiga. Zelda glanced up to see another arrow knocked, and she lifted the corpse up as a shield, grateful for those strength exercises. And in that motion, jostling back with the impact that didn't even touch her, she took a breath, pulled the bow and an arrow off the corpse. and shot. She'd shot a bow for ceremonies before, so the feeling of it and the practice weren't unfamiliar. But what was unfamiliar would be seeing an arrow leaving a bow just after hers. One that was heading right for her. Her arrow landed firmly in the Yiga's chest, sending them stumbling back in pain. But theirs landed too, knocked slightly off course when her arrow moved the Yiga's arm, and it ended up in her abdomen rather than her chest. Zelda had seen her soldiers killed with arrows before, a silent "oh" as they fell on their knees and died. She always assumed it didn't hurt, or that their last burst of adrenaline had kicked in. But she didn't die. She screamed. The first and most instinctual reaction was panic. She'd been shot. A Yiga had shot her, and all of her energy released in a fearful scream. Everything became blurry as she cried out, her hand shaking on the bow. The pain of simply breathing, the rise and fall motion of her torso already heaving from nerves. She was on fire, and she couldn't douse the flames. Link skidded in front of her, pushing something into her mouth that melted on her tongue almost immediately.
Do not pull the arrow out.
He hissed this through his blood-covered lips as he got back to his feet, grabbed a sword, and slammed it into the Yiga with the bow, effectively ending him faster than any other Yiga he'd fought. Her eyelids fluttered. Another body. Less pain. Link circling the final Yiga, saying something, blades clashing. 3 people. How 3? Which 3? He staggered. Who staggered, though? It all began to blur together, until Link was in front of her again, taking her face in both his hands.
Goddess, why didn't you run?
He was covered in blood to the point that he was nearly unrecognizable. His chest had a gaping wound, a blade that had shattered his chainmail to leave a trail pool along his shirt. There were several other wounds, especially one still bleeding on his cheek.
Are you okay?
Her eyes were stuck on the red that covered him.
No. Did you swallow that thing?
Yes.
Good.
He breathed a painful sigh of relief before gathering a strip of cloth and bunching it around the arrowhead lodged in her stomach.
Hold that there.
It didn't hurt.
What did you give me?
Link pushed himself to his feet, whistling for his horse, Epona, to return. She was trained enough to follow his call.
We carry a few, but we aren't to use them, really. Bad side effects. They're like condensed potions. Numbing effects to let us finish a battle. But Zelda, it's just numbing the wound. It's not healing it. So do not pull that arrow out. We're going back to Hateno.
You took one?
I took 3.
He managed to breathe that out before collapsing beside her, falling hard to his knees. He looked, well, terrible.
Link.
You should have run.
I know. I'm sorry.
Link's eyes fluttered, and he tightened his grip around the pommel of his sword.
Don't be. Don't be.
What's happening?
Kellen is getting help in Hateno. I'm getting you to Hateno, and then I might die.
That's not funny.
But Link didn't crack a smile. His hand ran along his bleeding chest wound before he scooted to the side of Zelda, away from the arrow, and wrapped his hands around her neck, regardless of how bloody they were. He brought his lips to her forehead, pressing them reverently against her for a long moment before trailing several shorter relieved ones down her temple and leaning back before he got to her cheek.
In case I can't do that later, Thank the goddess you're alive.
Link.
I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to stand guard until they get here. I'm already feeling sick. I'm just glad you're alright.
Rest, Link. I can watch.
His hand was hard against her shoulder.
Don't move. Remember? It's only numb. And it will wear off pretty quickly. So be prepared.
If there was such a thing as time, Zelda lost all sense of it. If the grass was green, it had turned gray behind her eyes. What was wind beyond an irritant to her tender skin?
Goddess, is that Link?
Someone send word to the castle!
Link! Oh, goddess! Princess!
What's happened?
Are these those Yigar assassins?
So much blood.
Get them to the healer!
Shh, Link, it's okay.
Sharp pain flooded her body, and all sound faded as Zelda was engulfed in darkness.